Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for Women Organizing Against Racism, Hate, and Discrimination. This is the first in a two-part webinar series we're doing this month as part of Anti-Racism Month. The event is organized by the National Women's Council and the Irish Network Against Racism to bring together women actively working to combat racism and hatred, challenge discrimination, and foster inclusivity in our communities. This webinar is going to be recorded, and you're welcome to put your comments or your questions into the Q&A box. But yeah, we're delighted to welcome a group of really inspiring women who are strong advocates for social justice and who are at the forefront of challenging some of the nastier narratives that have unfortunately been circulating in our communities and in our political discourse, particularly around immigration in Ireland. So they're going to share with us some insights into their work on the ground, followed by a discussion on how we can collectively challenge harmful narratives, racism, and discrimination. So today I'm delighted. I'm joined by Berta Quinonera from the Irish Network Against Racism. Berta is a social justice advocate with experience working with displaced communities. She is the network and communications lead at the Irish Network Against Racism, where she coordinates outreach initiatives to promote racial equality. I am joined by Sipewe Moyo from Empower, who is a trained community worker who predominantly works with refugees and refugee integration. She's currently working with Empower and serves on the board of UNHCR. She's a trained anti-racism trainer for community organizations and companies. I have Bea Gomez Moreno. She is a Spanish and social and cultural psychologist and co-founder and chief operating officer chief chief operating officer of Gorm, a multi-award-winning social enterprise here in Ireland. And we also have Niamh MacDonald, who is the Director of Advocacy and Community Engagement at the Hope and Courage Collective. Niamh is an experienced independent researcher as well, publishing peer-reviewed work and policy analysis. So I'm going to go around to everybody, but I'm going to ask you, Berta, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your organization, how you're organizing against racism, hate, and discrimination?
Hi, thank you, Rachel, and good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Berta Quinonero, and I'm the Network and Communications Officer at the Irish Network Against Racism. I'm delighted to be here today to speak about our work and how we're tackling the issues of hate and racism and discrimination in Ireland. So firstly, just to give an overview of what INAR is. So we are a network of over 190 civil society organizations and community groups working in solidarity to tackle racism and discrimination and promote human rights across Ireland. We believe in building solidarity to address the systemic and institutional barriers that perpetuate racism and discrimination in our communities, and our main work involves advocacy, research, networking, and community development, which are all driven by the voices of those who are most marginalized in our communities, and supported by those who work in solidarity with them. So a key part of my role is to link the grassroots organizations and the wider community together so that we can build a unified front to advocate for racial equality, lobby and influence policymaking in Ireland. Our work is centered on the idea that awareness is key, together with the many community groups and organizations that we work with. We focus on spreading awareness about the power relations that are ingrained in our communities, and we empower people to take action. Through our work, we strive to spread the message that racism isn't just a challenge for certain ethnic or minority groups, it's something that affects us all. When we see racism as a problem for marginalized communities alone, we'll never challenge the structures that privileges some over others, or that privileges some of us and disempowers others. So one of our main missions is to spread awareness about these systems of oppression that I just mentioned, and that really are shaping our societies today, and spreading all this hate that we're seeing around us. So in this context, it's essential to understand what it means to be an active anti-racist. Some of us hold privileges in society, privileges that we didn't necessarily choose, but that come with being part of certain groups. And we all have a responsibility to use those privileges to challenge the systems and institutions that uphold inequality. That is why it's not enough to simply not be racist, as we tend to put it. We must all be actively anti-racist and work together to dismantle the systems that prevent people from having equal access and opportunity in all aspects of life. And this is why our network and collective voices are so important, because we're not talking about these issues through communications, but we take action, and our policy work includes that action in the shape of advocacy. Like we advocate for stronger anti-racism laws that combat hate speech and support the communities that are most affected by racism. So as I was saying earlier, we work in solidarity with our partners, and we collaborate with organizations across Europe to push for policy changes that address racism at all levels, locally, nationally, and internationally as well. And on this, one of the most important tools that we've developed is the iReport system that many of you might be aware of. And this platform allows people to report incidents of racism in a confidential, independent, and very easy to use way. So whether someone has personally experienced racism, witnessed it, or heard about an incident that happened in their communities, they should really report incidents via this system. And this, because it essentially enables us to track patterns of racist behavior and support emerging trends that have informed our reports, our annual reports over the past 10 years. And then also inform our advocacy efforts. So our work is centered on engaging with communities directly as well. We provide anti-racism training, campaigns, and other tools to civil society groups, supporting them in their efforts to challenge racism. And I know we understand that talking about racism can be very uncomfortable for some, or for many, but it's vital to remember that racism is not about labeling people as racist, but about acknowledging the historical and structural inequalities that continue to affect our people today, and ultimately about taking responsibility for creating a society where everybody has equal rights and opportunities regardless of their background.
Thanks so much, Berta. And yeah, INAR, such valued members of the National Women's Council, we're delighted to have this event with you today. Bea, I'm going to come to you next.
Sure. Thanks, Rachel, and thanks, Berta, for that lovely presentation. I also want to thank everybody organizing this amazing webinar. I'm very delighted to be sharing this space with such powerful women around me. So thanks a lot at the very beginning. As said, my name is Beatriz, but please call me Bea. I'm a social and cultural psychologist originally from Spain, and I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer at GORM. We are an award-winning social enterprise on a mission to unify across differences and advance belonging for marginalized communities. And we do that through intercultural consultancy, impactful media, and community-led programs. GORM actually started as a storytelling platform, and we believe that storytelling is an amazing and powerful tool for social and narrative change. That is our mission statement, and we use that intentionally across everything that we do in order to challenge prejudice, anti-racism, and build empathy and shift systems at the end of the day. Our approach works on three interconnected pillars, what we call our 3 E's, which are elevating voices, enabling communities, and equipping leaders. Each of them are designed to foster intercultural understanding and empathy, and we mainly focus on the media landscape. As Mamobo, the founder, part of her research is on the impact of media as well as mine. So that's where the field in which we try to fight for anti-racism and build more inclusive societies. So these first two pillars, elevating voices and enabling communities, are more grassroots focused. So it's community-led, and we work directly with marginalized and underrepresented communities that are directly impacted by racism and exclusion. But the last one, that is equipping leaders, is more of a top-down process, as we believe that we need to engage with people that are in positions of power, because they do have a key responsibility in driving that systemic change. And by having these two approaches, we believe that at the end, in the middle, we will find that social and narrative change that will bring us to a more equitable and inclusive societies. So as a small brief of what each pillar does, elevating voices, that's how we actually started, is where we create our own media content that it's completely free in our socials, mainly on YouTube, in which we elevate the voices through storytelling from members of these diverse communities and marginalized communities that have been and are still often ignored or misrepresented in the mainstream media. And we don't say that we give them a voice or we empower anybody. Everybody has a voice, but sometimes, most of the times, there's a lack of a platform in which these communities can share their stories the way that they want to, and with total freedom, and in a way that they can have that freedom to share what is pertaining to be to their communities and what is their reality, what do they do to find belonging within their communities. And we believe that we can, feed into this narrative change and social change by doing that, because of course it's important to have that representation in front of the camera, but also in behind the camera. Which brings us to enabling communities, that is that grassroots community programs in which we work with these community members in order for them to become the new media landscape. We know that for us it's going to be very difficult to just change the media landscape as a whole. So we believe that by having people from these diverse communities and marginalized communities behind the camera, leading the stories, leading the documentaries, leading the filmings, they will be shaping the future of the media landscape, and therefore, tackling all these narratives that we are facing, that we have been facing for a long time, that we are also facing right now. So with our programs like the Wide Shot and the Close-Up, we provide storytelling and filming and documentary skills to these marginalized communities for them to become the new media landscape in the future. And in that sense, to tackle those historical inequalities and discriminations, and building collective power of these communities, entering power spaces that they keep facing systemic barriers in accessing. And we also do events within enabling communities, in which we try to foster a space in which everybody can thrive, everybody can find their sense of belonging and be their true selves, mostly in the creative space. And we have our annual event that is called the Con Gathering, in which we try to highlight all those creative voices in Ireland, and in order to find that systemic change at the end of the day. And finally, we have equipping leaders. That is where we provide intercultural consultancy and training for both public agencies, private companies, or small NGOs or universities, in order to build that intercultural competency. So both Mamowo, that is the founder, and myself, and social and cultural psychologists, and we specialized on prejudice, discrimination, and solidarity actions. And in the last few years, we have been specializing on intercultural competence as a tool to unify across differences and create more equitable and inclusive societies through intercultural education, both from the grassroots point of view, but also from the top down, on people that have power and can actually drive that systemic change on an easier and faster approach than what we can do on the grassroots level. And I think that's pretty much it myself.
That's super. Thanks so much. Sipewe, I might come to you next. Sorry, just on mute there.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor and a privilege to be amongst all other women that are here, talking about the issues that affect communities that are racialized. I'm a community development worker. I am working with Empower, which is an organization that works with different marginalized communities. And my work centers around refugees and asylum seekers, in terms of supporting them as they come in, and all the issues that they face, including racism and discrimination. And so for me, I think starting the work of working as an anti-racism facilitator and working in this space started when I was in college. So when I was doing my undergraduate in community and youth development, so we had a module in racism that really opened my eyes into understanding racism and how to support myself and the people that are around me, because I was working at that point. I was working as a support worker or a carer, and in that space, and one of the places that I realized how much there was racism, and there was no support, absolutely no support for people who were working in that space. And so as a carer, when you faced that during the work times, no one was there to support you. And sometimes people chose to keep quiet at that time, because some of them, they're in at work because using their permits, and that work permit then is linked to the employer, and then it becomes difficult for you now to try and voice out your concerns or to name this racism and things like that, especially when we talk about racism. Many people are not comfortable. So when I then started this module, we learned that, like, it was for us to report, and then we learned about INAR, which is the reporting tool where you reported the incidents. And so that's when I got involved with INAR and then trained as an anti-racism facilitator. And I continued as well working with TU Dublin in trying to find a solution or ways in order to support myself and others in this journey. Because whilst you are going through it, or when it's a lived experience or something that happens now and again, it's very difficult for you to support others, because you're also going through it. You also look at the other people around you that are trying to fight racism, and they are also, because of the issues that are facing in the systematic way, it's difficult for them. The only thing sometimes we will do is to just call each other and find and say, this is what's going on and we're tired. How do we move forward? And one of the challenges that I've faced, and that we continue to face, is the resources to support the community. So you might want to go out and support the communities. You might have the zeal to try and organize people, but the reality is there is no resources, and even to equip yourself and to equip others as well to join in this space. So for me, it's coming from that space. But with Empower, we've done like a network, and we're now trying to come up with an anti-racism roadmap that can support other organizations and ourselves as well to implement, to say, how do we put together structures that support the people as they work in this space? So it's something that it's a resource that will be I'm launching with TU Dublin on the 7th of May. So we are hoping with that, because it comes in phases, it helps organizations to say, how do you take it step by step to support these other organizations? So we're hoping it's going to be something that will be helpful, and to us as well as an organization, to look and support the people that really need us and how to support them.
Thanks so much. Yeah, this is going to be a fascinating panel discussion. I'm looking forward to it. So I'm going to come to Niamh now, just to introduce yourself and the work that you do. Thanks.
Thanks, Rachel. I want to thank INAR and the National Women's Council for having me today. It's great to be on in such a space and such a powerful panel. So I work for the Hope and Courage Collective. So we're a civil society organisation. We support kind of community, civil society structures and politicians to understand how to respond to hate, extremism and kind of hate violence that's coming up in our communities. But we also kind of look at the threat this has to our democracy. And we don't mean like just parliamentary democracy, but a democracy in our communities who can participate and who's not able to participate because of this. So we develop a kind of analysis of hate. We develop inclusive narratives. We have a community of practice that supports communities to understand how to respond in crisis situations. And we also develop an analysis of the role that social media plays in amplifying hate and extremism. So I suppose, and the effect it has on our democracy. So I suppose HCC really is a catalyst for bringing kind of people together to work together. So my role is as the kind of director of community engagement and advocacy. I support communities to understand how to respond in crisis situations. So since 2023, I've supported over 70 communities to respond to crisis situations, whether that be kind of mobilizations, kind of protests, encampments, arson attacks and riots. So And a big part of that is to support the communities to stay grounded, calm, caring, and resilient in the face of all of this, but also to support the people directly affected by this, and to understand why this is happening and how they can respond in a safe and secure manner. So we kind of have developed a kind of community of practice around this. So normally we would see these moments kind of beginning before other people would see them. We see an all of online. We have indicators to analyze this. So my role then would be to go in and identify kind of community leaders in a localized area, because each community is unique and the response has to come from each community. It can't come from outside of the community, because this is about trusted kind of voices and trusted leaders. So I would come in and we could identify trusted leaders. We can bring in our analysis of what's happening and to situate that in the wider kind of context of Ireland. And then we would kind of help them to build an inclusive narrative. We would kind of help with a de-escalation process. And then we kind of support, it goes from kind of defending our community to then being proactive in our in communities. So then it's about being able them to be able to talk positively about their community, positively about new people coming into their communities, new neighbours, new friends, new work colleagues, new schoolmates. And how can we situate this as being part of a community? Because the main role of hate and extremism is to divide us. And they're looking to divide us on kind of very negative and differences, using very, very hateful narratives. So our role is to bring communities together, acknowledging the differences and celebrating those differences, but saying as a community, we work together. We have similar needs, we have similar wants. Some may have more than others, but by coming together and talking proactively and positively together while identifying those issues, we can work. We also support kind of politicians and organisations how not to get baited into reacting, because we can see that since the previous election, the Overton window in Ireland is shifting to the right, to understand how social media can amplify narratives, how those narratives can become normalised into everyday society, and how they become part of the political norm, if that makes sense to you. So how can we start to engage with politicians, show them what's happening, the effects it's having in the community, and the effects it's having on our democracy? As I say, we see democracy not just in the parliament, but in our communities, and who can engage. Because what hate and extremism does, it wants to narrow the points of people who can engage with democracy, whose voices are being heard. And who lives in Ireland, their voices all deserve to be heard. So I suppose we also provide ongoing training on narratives, training on community support. We do a lot of risk assessment, support communities if they're having events, how to stay as safe as possible. We kind of call it like a bit of like a fire drill. So if you're prepared for everything, a lot of eventualities they don't happen, but if you're prepared for these things, everything goes much more smoothly. And it's about creating a sense of confidence, a sense of out there, a sense of being together. Because one thing that hate and extremism relies on us being silent, relies on us being scared, relies on us not knowing how to respond. So normally people have the values, they understand how to respond, but it's how do we amplify that? How do we give them the confidence to stand up and do that on a daily basis? So my job is to go to support communities from being maybe silenced or scared into defending what they have, into being proactive, and into celebrating and their diversity of everybody in our communities. So I think that's me for now, folks, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Niamh. I'll ask all our panelists to put on their cameras, please. That's great. And yeah, I just want to remind our viewers, if they want to pop any questions into the Q&A box, they're very welcome to do that. But I suppose, yeah, my perspective, and just to kick us off, all of that was really fascinating. I think, Beatrice, you'd mentioned around the need to kind of foster empathy and the importance of storytelling. Sipewa, you talked about our key care workers affected by racism and that lived experience. And, I have to say, it always really just strikes me. I just think it's so interesting, given our own experiences here in Ireland with colonialism, with our experience in that collective trauma of mass immigration through different phases of our history. You would think that that would give us a kind of a unique sense of solidarity. And unfortunately, that maybe isn't always the case. So, yeah, so many of us who are participating in today and are watching would definitely identify as anti-racist, and they want really badly to combat those hateful narratives. and like what you were saying, Neve, like, yeah, we really want to live in communities that are inclusive and safe for everyone who calls Ireland home. But bearing in mind what you say in terms of not being baited, if each of us had kind of one piece of advice on what people can tangibly do to address discrimination and hate in their community or in their workplace, what would you say? So, Bayway, I'll come to you first, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rachel, for that. You called my name, right? Or
I said, here, you go ahead, Bea, and then I'll come to Sipiwe next.
oh, you said Sipiwe. No, please.
It's okay.
Sipiwe, go ahead. I misunderstood that. Go ahead, Sipiwe. Sorry, my bad.
Okay, then we'll come back to you, Bea. Thanks.
Okay, I think there's three ways of looking at it, at individual, communities, and say, even at work. So I would say at individual, it's about self-awareness, understanding and seeing those biases, educating ourselves, and then confronting those biases, and then also speaking up.
Yeah, spot on. Bea, I'll come to you. Yeah.
Thanks. So one of the things that we are seeing in the work that we do, mainly on the part of the equipping leaders in terms of consultancy and training, and it was a common thing that we found in a report that we did with the support of the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission a few years ago, was the fear of not saying anything, or the fear of saying the wrong thing. So it might not seem as something like a discrimination directed to someone, but the problem in here is that most of the times this fear of saying the wrong thing leads to inaction. And this inaction, the only thing that leads is to not engaging with these communities that are already marginalized and that are already isolated enough. So, and this really reminds me of some of the points that Neve was saying before. So I believe that we need to start tackling that fear of saying the wrong thing, that fear of making the mistakes. And that's something that we try to do on the trainings that we do. And not only that you can have fun, and in learning about anti-racism, in learning about intercultural competence, and in learning about those unifying across differences, but that is okay to set a standard, that it's okay to make mistakes. It's not about that mistake, but it's about what you do when that mistake happens. And I'm really saying this from my point of view as a white European privileged woman. I made a lot of mistakes, and I had to learn a lot from those. I had to reconstruct myself, because in the context of Ireland, you guys are a country that have been colonized, but I'm coming from a country that is a colonizer, and I'm still taught in school that, colonization in America was the discovery of America and the civilization of America. So I had to do a lot of deconstruction myself in order to start understanding these narratives and these discourses that I've been fed my entire life. So what we try to do is to really establish a space, a safe enough space in which mistakes are okay. And then what do you do when that mistake happens? Because ultimately what we don't want is to keep having these communities isolated, in which they don't build social capital, that they don't build social connections, because at the end, all of that is going to trickle down into a lot of more spaces that they are not happening in Ireland or in general in Europe, because without that social capital, you're not going to have connections for accessing funding. You're not going to have connections for accessing workplaces, to accessing even spaces to have fun, like public spaces in which that you'll be safe and you will have a place to find that belonging and to build connections both in the workplace or in your personal life. So I think that we need to start leaving behind that fear of saying the wrong thing and start building an active listening skill and learning what to do when that mistake happened, and building curiosity and cultural perspective taking, so we can start building those relationships with people that are different from you, and through that contact tackling all those terrible narratives terrible anti-migrant narratives that we are facing at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting advice. I think it's maybe what you're saying is call it out. And I suppose it's finding ways to call it out. And
Mostly
finding,
when this is uncomfortable, people don't want to feel discomfort. People don't want to have that uncomfortable situation. And I think the social media and communication through the phone is really feeding into this. I'm feeling comfortable just texting. We are missing that social skills that is just like, I need to have this conversation one-to-one, face-to-face, that makes me feel uncomfortable. We need to thrive in that discomfort. What we say that is finding comfort in the discomfort, because that's what makes us learn and makes us better people and better societies at the end.
Yeah, definitely. Neva, I'll bring you in because yeah, I think we probably there is some difficulty in learning how to disagree about things, or and that fear of making a mistake. What's your take?
Yeah, I suppose first of all, I always say like healthy communities need to have difficult conversations. That's the sign of a healthy community, it's the sign of a democracy, but it's how they're conducted. I don't like the term calling out because it's got a really not it's got very negative connotations. I think we need calling people in towards us. I think that's a much nicer way, because we wanted to have dancing, not fighting. That's the way we would want to. We want to have continued conversations with people that are ongoing in our communities. I think the first thing we always come to is that when I'm working with people is it's how we use acronyms to describe people, especially people seeking asylum. I go to people who are very well intentioned and all that. And again, I'm talking about as a white Irish working class woman who's sitting here, But like I always like people are kind of uses IPOs or this or there's that or the other. So the system is designed to dehumanize people in the first place. I think that's like we have to acknowledge that in the first place, And the system of direct provision is designed not to have people in our communities, to have people separated. They're moved and very, very quickly moved on, not to make roots, not to do all that. So I think one of the first things that we can do is that we can, first of all, to start humanizing it first. Massive movement of asylum seekers is always calls for people to be using people-centered. So it's people seeking asylum, people coming from migrants, so it's the human part is always first. So I think that's where we start. And we did research most recently. And well, a year ago in the Hope and Courage Collective, we message tested 3,000 people across the country. And I know there's a comment there, people saying we don't talk to the far right. I'm going to address that now. So what we've seen, the most extreme views was 1.9%. That's the ultimate fascism, really, really extreme far right views. We are not going to change their views, right? So there has to be a recognition of that. But what we have is the persuadables. That's about 65 to 70% of people. We don't believe that people are center. Like society isn't static. Like society is always moving back and forth. We can see our politics is moving back and forth. So the more people hear something like we talk about online, people hear the consistent narratives online, they can be persuaded by it. So we need to understand how can we persuade people back through an inclusive narrative, a race, class, gender inclusive narrative. That's our community. So we have to talk about what do people know? Do you understand our communities? Like we all in our communities, we have lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds going to school, going to the shops, on the bus together. It's what we experience every day and it's what we understand every day. So it's how do we bring that context and how do people can discuss that in a way that's inclusive? I think it's very important that people will have questions. And if people come to you with questions, there's a reason why they're coming to you. You're progressive, you're anti-racist, you're anti-fascist, you're feminist. So they're asking questions because they may have seen something online, they may have heard something online, and it doesn't sit well with them. But because it's very vague and it's the disinformation, or it's, what the far right peddle in, so they're coming to ask you for questions. So it's like it's being patient, it's navigating those conversations. From that research that we did, where we saw that the persuadables, we've developed this kind of like navigating one-to-one conversations, and we don't call them difficult conversations because you're setting yourself up for a fight then. You're setting yourself up for negativity. So how do we set ourselves up for positivity? We navigate the conversations. It might sound a bit sweet, but you sit down and have a cup of tea. I'm thinking of a relative that I'd see at Christmas, or someone I'd see in the post office, or someone I'd see on the way to school after dropping my son to school. And all those community conversations are essential. And it's having them offline. We will not win this online. I'm not saying we don't use social media or it's the big bad internet or da-da-da-da. Well, it's those community connections and the one-to-one, and it's the humanizing. Again, I'll go back to how do we describe people in our communities? We describe people who are coming to our communities to seek asylum. There are new neighbors, there are new friends, there are kids, new classmates. We work together, we're on the bus together. So how do we give that sense of this big we, and people are welcomed, while also acknowledging that racism exists? What hasn't been acknowledged here is the traveller community, which is extraordinarily important. And I think there's something that said it's not to be Irish is not to be racist. I think the traveller community would disagree with that fundamentally, and the state as well. And it's the same actions that the far right are using. It's the same that communities have put towards the traveller community for decades and decades and decades. So we're kind of standing on the giants of those shoulders of the first anti-racist movement in Ireland, and we can learn a lot from that. And I don't think they should be forgotten in this conversation. I think it's extraordinarily important that they need to be part, and we can learn from that conversation as well. So I'll stop there because there's other people who want to get
Yeah,
in.
and thanks for bringing that up, because actually one of my, and Berta, I'm sure you have loads you want to add to that. But one of the things I wanted to say is that I suppose when maybe we think about racism, and the things that come to mind maybe are some of the more, the attacks that have happened, or these big demonstrations, and lots of men kind of gathering with this kind of rhetoric. But we know that the everyday experiences of racism for people from the traveler community or people of color, it doesn't look like that actually. And yeah, I wonder if you have some good examples, panelists, on how we would intervene safely to kind of address those microaggressions. And Eve, I love that you call them in, not call them out. Yeah, Berta, I'll come to you now.
Yeah, no, I think that Neve made some really like good and strong points about all that. Like it's really important that we're not using like big fancy words, or like earlier I was talking about like acknowledging our privilege or whatever, and that seems like I think a lot of people might perceive the word privilege as negative, like, oh, check your privilege. And and there's the mistake. Like it's not about like checking or acknowledging your privilege, but actually like, acting on it. Okay, what does my privilege allow me to do, and how can I use that privilege to support people whose like social status might not allowed to like advocate for or whatever. And actually, like there was something that Neve was saying about how like we are dehumanizing people, and there's this whole like narrative, especially around like, people seeking asylum being called IPAs, IPOs. And I just realized I do some community work, or not community work, like I'm involved in community groups that just meet with local neighbours who happen to live in direct provision centres around the area. And even in the group chat, some of these people from the community who are welcoming the new neighbours are actually addressing these people as IPOs or IPAs, and it's interesting. It's interesting to think about it. But yeah, and on the whole privilege, and Bea was referring to this as well. Like I suppose when you're not acting on your privilege, and I hate to keep using this word, but when you're not when you're not acting, when you're not taking action against racism, against this dysfunctional relations that are taking place in our communities, we're just being complacent. And I think it really all comes, like, I don't want to sound simplistic, but we need to be engaging in conversations. We need to have conversations. And I know Neve was talking about this as well, like, and how important it is, and not to make people feel defensive about any of the issues they're facing, because and we see this especially around all the arson attacks that have taken place in some of the direct provision centres that have been set up. The climate or the environment of those is a community that was already marginalised, that was not that were not involved in any process of discussing what was going to happen in that old industrial site that they had vacant in there, and then we're seeing people are upset because there's underlying societal issues that no one has showed willingness to talk to them about, and I think that really is the basis of what we really should be doing, like conversations that could cut across all the different levels of society. And Bea was talking about like engaging with people who are in power, and seeing what, or maybe advising on what they could do. But there's all these other layers that we really need to be addressing, so that there's no different layers, if that makes sense. And yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think unfortunately, in some ways, it's sort of and rightly so, like the attention on this sort of toxic environment. It kind of lets off the hook some of the real, issues that are, within these communities. It's, very frustrating. So Pepe, I might come over to you just to get your thoughts in response to some of the things that have been said here.
All right. Okay. Yes. Thank you so much for the other panelists and the issues that they've addressed. And I think when it comes to microaggressions or addressing those kind of things that come up sometimes as joke or things that you can't really name properly and say this is what has happened in this space, it's very difficult. I think when you are the person who is maybe from the member of the racialized communities, it's very difficult to say this has happened because you have got people who are ready to say no, but this person didn't mean this, or already like it really puts you in a position where you kind of like someone who is like very like who's always looking for trouble, you know. So sometimes you kind of like have to mind yourself and say, should I call it, should I talk about it at this point? Is the environment safe enough for me? So the platforms and the workplaces and the places where we need to say we need to have these conversations have to be safe enough for the person who is also involved, as well as if you're gonna intervene in that space to try and support the situation. You also have to look at the person who's been affected. How has they been affected? Do they want to address it at that point? Because sometimes it happens and I'm on the spot and I don't want to talk about it, you know. So you need to address and see, if I don't, how do you then, even you outside me, have a conversation to say, probably guys, let's gather and let's talk about this. This is an issue. Maybe this has affected this person this way, because it's not easy, especially if it's something that you have to prove, because it makes you question your sanity. It feels like, okay, it's something that is in your mind, but this person was not coming from that point, or you are using a race card. So those kind of things where you really can't prove, it's not as easy as, you know, no, we can have a conversation. It needs people who are aware, who understand biases, who understand all these things that happens and the stereotypes. Sometimes it looks like normal, you know, it was just, you know, this person just was touching your hair, it's okay, like it's normal. Or this person just said, oh, you actually speak your English very fluently, and it feels like they haven't said anything, but deep you understand. So how do I say to this person who's coming from a point of saying, oh, your English like is very good, and then I say to them, okay, this is something that I don't like because it makes me feel this way, you know. So it's not very easy from that point where you are the person who
Yeah.
has to challenge it. So it's conversations that has to happen within, whether it's a workspace, whether it's within the communities, and really saying, should we look at our language? Should we look at all these things or acronyms or things that we are putting and boxing people into, and trying by all means to perpetuate this, what the system is doing? The system has already put people somewhere. So you as an individual or as an organization, what is it that you are doing that to make sure that you are dismantling those systems, but you're not adding more systems and making it more difficult? There are no resources really in most organizations. When I was doing like a research to see what other organizations are doing to support people that are racialized in their communities if they face racism, I couldn't find something that is tangible to say, okay, we have this way that this person will go through and we support them through, and still they can still come out okay. So that's why sometimes you get tired of these small issues, microaggression things, and then you try and focus on other things that are even maybe that you feel it impacts you, you know. So now you have to choose your battles. You know, for me, there are things that someone can say, yes, it really is something that that person must not have said to me, but I'll just choose not to talk about it, because there's a bigger issue. I'm looking at myself wanting to move forward at work. Does it have, I made a space where I'm allowed to move forward and really get to a position where whatever I've worked for, or the you know, the effort that I've put is seen, and I'm being, you know, recognized at that point. So it's for someone to say your hair or touch my hair, I'll deal with you later. But these are conversations that are real. These are things that are there. So I mean, having people around, you know, other people that are fighting, or some people who are also in within the organizations who have the privilege that we are talking about, to say, okay, at this position, probably I want to address that, and I can be someone who's there coming and saying, can we have conversations? Can we have safe spaces that can affect, that can support people that we are working with, whether you are supporting people or you are within the workspace?
Thanks. I think you raised like some really, really important points. I know others who want to kind of come back on this. Yeah, like around the kind of the picking your battles, and it's come up quite a bit in the chat box as well, even around like the big campaign and mobilization for stronger hate speech laws. And it's so important, like it's absolutely essential, that we see progress on that. But creating the spaces for the storytelling, for the lived experience, for those microaggressions, so that people can actually foster a better empathy, as you were saying, Bea, and a better just understanding. Because as you say, people are potentially coming at this just unfortunately from a place of ignorance. They didn't know any better. And we need to create a space where it's okay to kind of address that in a healthy way, and in a bringing people in. But yeah, I say you wanted to come in there. Come over to you now.
Thank you. I just wanted to really stress those points that CP was just mentioning now. I think that there's this metaphor. I don't remember from where I heard it, but it was a long time ago, that says that if you have a leak in your house, you're getting water from the apartment above you, it's not up to you to fix it. It needs to be the person that is provoking the leaking to fix that problem. And I think that we are missing a little bit that point when it comes to discrimination and anti-racism. I think that the main focus to fix anti-racism and to tackle this issue is for the people that are facing anti-racism and the people that are facing that discrimination. And that's why sometimes it's difficult to talk about privileges, but it should also be on us. Like, I think that it's easier, not easier, but maybe for people to understand better, like with feminism, we are really trying to bring men into the action, because they are also the ones that need to learn about these issues. I think that in that sense, it's exactly the same with people that we do hold power, that we do hold privileges into having these issues, because I think it's a little bit, not a little bit, it's very unfair to put all the weight of changing the system to the people that are already being discriminated in the system just by themselves. So I think that it is important to have that uncomfortable conversation, self-reflection of, I do hold power, I do hold privileges, what am I doing to do something about this? And it's just not on the people that are facing those discriminations. So I highly appreciate that you share all of that, CP, because sometimes we just see that this issue should be fought by just the people that are being affected by this. And I think that that's not how we actually approach systemic change, because I cannot imagine, how much difficult it be to handle your life as a human being with your own problems on your own day, and then you face the scenarios as the ones that you were mentioning, and just like, what do I do now? Is it my place? What can I do? I think that in that sense is where people leverage our own power and our own privileges to ease that issue, because at the end we are the ones provoking the leaking on the apartments underneath us, and it's not the person that is being fed with the water doing that.
Thanks. Neve.
Just one thing, I think the word privilege kind of lets the system off the hook, to be perfectly honest with you. It lets the system in which we live under off the hook. Right? So the structures of the state are essentially racist. So we have to understand that. And I don't like the word privilege. It's like the word ally. It kind of absolves any responsibility or accountability to people, because you can just wipe it off when you walk away from the protest, or wipe it off when you walk away from other things. I think it's understanding the system in which we live under, and it's understanding what solidarity means. And solidarity means shared problems, shared solutions, and standing together and accountability to each other. So I don't use the word ally or privilege when I talk about things. I understand where my own, there's an intersectional approach on this, and it's a race, class, and gender. And I think we all live under a system which is designed to separate us. It's designed to look at differences. It's designed to talk about privilege. It's designed to get people angry about all these type of things. I think we acknowledge that people of colour have increased barriers for lots of different reasons that we can all talk about. I'm a working class single mum. I've got lots of barriers that I need help with as well. And I think we can come together to break down, because a lot of those barriers are similar because they're systemic.
Yeah.
And I think we have to talk about the system that we're under, and the system that is oppressing more so than others, but a lot, and women especially. So I think that's what's going to unify us across differences. That's what's going to build our solidarity, is understanding the systemic approach, the racism that's towards travellers in councils, towards housing, the racism towards people seeking asylum coming into the country, and how that has shifted to the right. The oppression of women for lots of different spaces, the reason why women aren't in power, and why we bring lots of different women together to do things, So I think we need to change our conversation and change our thinking around how do we look at the shared problems. the problems are different, but how do we come together to acknowledge those problems, and how can we work together, and then we can learn from each other? Because lots of things that I experience as a working class single mum in the North Inner City, other people wouldn't understand. Lots of things that people, women of colour, I wouldn't understand. But having those shared spaces and being able to discuss that in a way that's empowering, that brings us together, and that can filter out. So I think it's the systemic. We start with the system, not our privilege, because it's the system that's the issue. You know?
Yeah, Neve, I don't think anyone here would disagree with that. I think it's actually, that really sums up, I think, the real challenge that we have. I think there's, just as you are kind of talking there, like there does seem to be a need for strategies to sort of address this at, like state level, community level, and at the individual level. And, we're only going to do that by creating these types of conversations and creating these types of spaces. I mean, it has come up quite a bit in the chat box in terms of the role of the state and whether, the role kind of has a state or sorry, the state has a role in addressing, hate speech and racism. Are there more things that need to be happening from kind of that level? Because I think, as you're saying, Neve, like those are the systemic issues. And I think if we kind of can all kind of collectively, look at our struggles, bringing them together to try and break down those barriers that kind of come from that level, what would you see as maybe one thing we can all advocate for?
I just think just one thing when it comes to politics, just from Hope Encourage's perspective, right? It's the baiting of politicians, right? We can see since November 2022, when this really started to kick off, racism has always been here. It's always been here. So let's just but how we can see that politicians have been baited into reacting, and the success that the haters have had through implementing their narratives. We can see we've got a very much more right-wing government now. The Overton window has shifted. The policies are hardening. We can say whether you disagree or agree with the hate speech or whatever it may be. We can see prior to November 2022, that was on a certain road. Now that road is gone. So we can understand the shift in the Overton window. We can see a massive shift for people seeking asylum, especially young men. The narrative of that single unvetted male has come through, where we've got men who are on the canals in tents. And if they're not getting attacked by the far right, they're getting attacked by the state and told to move on. So either way, it's coming out. So we have to acknowledge the shifting. So from our perspective, it's kind of politicians engaging with them, whether you disagree, engaging. How do they stay grounded within the baiting? How do they not let what X is saying dominate what policies they do effectively, or what's happening on the ground? Do you know what I mean? And and they understand how narrative and discourse is being shaped and what's happening around that, and how they respond to that. And our role in the Hope Encourage is to brief politicians when this is happening, not just in tense moments, but in general, so they have an understanding of the playbook, the narrative. We can see in the US, we can see in the UK, we can see what's happening in Hungary, how politicians can be baited, and the Overton window shifts. So we think counter policy or progressive policies is the counterweight to this, and discussions like this. But it's policies that include everybody, the race, class, gender, that everybody, like what you just said there, Rachel. And how do we collectively start campaigning for this? And it's also, we know that what the far right are doing are distracting us away from the very real material needs of housing, homelessness, assessment of needs, healthcare, childcare, all those things that predominantly affect women in a lot of times. We also have to acknowledge that there's a lot of women being left behind in communities, and they are being influenced or persuaded by the far right narrative. How do we reach those women who believe that feminism is not there for them, that they don't understand that? In my community, there would be a lot of people who feel that way. How do we have those conversations? I don't want to dominate anymore, so I'll just.
No, I think it's all really, really important, and I'm sure everyone would be in agreement. I mean, so maybe you mentioned, and it's come up in the chat as well, just the lack of resourcing and funding to really meaningfully address. I think unfortunately a lot of the funds that maybe you have been out there can come off real tokenistic, and they like to see programs are very happy clappy, and you had a few people of color, and it's and yeah, I wonder just kind of maybe what your views are on that.
In terms of funding and in terms of participation of people, I think there needs to be a fair distribution of both, because we need each other, like Niv is saying, in this journey, and we need the people that are also affected to be at the decision table and be part of the of the conversations. But when you see most of the things, most of the times you would find that the people are there. Like you are there most of the times. It's about when there is research. There is research. Then people say their issues. This is what we are looking for. And then the ones that say, for example, it was a research, those publishing the research are going, and then it all goes there. But the real people who should also participate and say, this is what we are looking for is not there. So I would also like, we had this argument at in European Network Against Racism event conference last week, where many organizations were also coming out again talking about the resources and the way that, you know, some of the organizations, the way that it's more of tokenistic in terms of supporting the people that are there. You would find that the people that came in to that meeting were people who are, or because it's maybe they've sent the people that are the CEO or the people that are at the top to come and talk about these debates at the parliament. But the people who also are affected are not there. So the whole organization, the people that are there are not really represented. So I think it's just conversations and looking at your organization by organization. When you look at your organization, does it really show that inclusiveness or that diversity that you are talking about? You know, do you have women? Do you have people with different people? And are they active, or they are just there as employees who are there maybe sweeping or doing the other job? Not saying that sweeping is not important, but do you have at that managerial level where you have people who can also affect decision making in terms of when it comes to issues like that of discrimination, of inclusion, of any sort? So if your organization says, yes, we've got that, then you are on the right direction. And as well, when you bring those people into those organizations, don't just bring them and then the platform is not conducive. You have seen where people are there, but people, they are not safe as well in those organizations. Like, they can't say anything, they can't do anything, but they're just there as part of saying we're a diverse community. When you look at when you bring that person closer, because when working in this space has taught me to say, don't look at an organization and say, go out, this organization is a civil society, and really it's also there, championing this social justice slogans. It's when you really get closer, you really recognize and see how much is going on in those organizations by the employees that are there, that will be crying, and you'll be like, but this shouldn't be happening in this. So for me, it's looking at you as an organization that is saying that we're championing this work before you call out other organizations which are not even in this space. It begins with us as a civil society or people that are in this space. Look at your organization today and say it in your own words, like honestly saying, this, my organization stands for this, and we will champion this work because all our employees really can stand, even if they are just pulled and said, okay, how is the organization? They can really testify that I'm really safe, I can do anything, I'm also empowered to empower the other people. So for me, it's that when I would say everyone is working in the thing. But for now, I can't really say that, to say that it's really, I can see it. I see it in some organization, of not, I can't say in the organization, I would say maybe on individuals who represent those organizations. On an individual, it's now like the person who's there might be really their way of thinking and the way they support, they're really 100% in there, but it's not the policies, because you also have to look at the policies of the organizations that are there. Do they support that work? Do they showcase that work?
Thanks. Yeah, no, I think those are all really good points. And yeah, I guess to kind of summarize that, is that the change really needs to kind of start within, in this kind of more reflective practices and building that into your organizations. But what's important there is that there's safety created for those types of kind of that reflection. And, Bea, you were saying that, we can make mistakes and bring people along. Bea, I'll come over to you, because obviously, like we were saying, that kind of three-pronged approach in terms of the strategies for the individual, the community, the state. Like, do you think the state has a greater role to kind of play in all of this? What kind of programs would you like to see? In the chat box, there's mention of, programs for children, for example, and you're running really successful programs. So would like to get your take.
Thanks for that. Of course, the government is extremely important in all of this. As we keep mentioning, anti-racism and discrimination is a systemic thing, and this is not something that could be changed, unfortunately, from one day to another. So we do need systemic decisions and actions in order to shift the way that we are doing and the way that we have been going for a long time. With that being said, our main experience is in the creative landscape, and it is true that we have seen that there's let's say an increase in eagerness into elevating diverse creatives and creatives from Black descent. But of course, this is just an eagerness. At the end, the systemic change doesn't change, because what we are seeing is that there's some funding specifically. The For Ireland Against Racism Fund has existed, but we now know that it's going to be gone for next year, and our programs are being funded, for example, by Screen Ireland or Commission a Man or the Arts Council. But the problem that we see in all of that is that, and this is some consultations that we have some of the people that we engage with, is that, okay, we are having these fundings, we are having these opportunities, but people are not applying, people are not accessing these funds. And then is when we ask, okay, you are designing this funding for this specific community, but what are you doing to make this funding accessible, in a sense of, and I'm not going to name names, but these applications are an absolute nightmare. Like, you need a lot of social capital in order to make the application. The language of the applications are not accessible either. So you need to have a very strong organization behind you, a lot of social capital in terms of partnerships and organizations that need to support you in order to be able to apply. So at the end, these fundings might be there or designed for diverse creatives, but at the end, the systems behind how these fundings are being designed, but also CP, we were saying, like, are diverse creatives behind the decision making on who is getting this funding or who is not? So at the end, I think that it's kind of doing the surface level. That is just, we are doing that tokenistic, let's say, more visible representation, but we are not willing to change how the table is being built in that sense. So even, for us, it's extremely difficult to access these fundings because of everything that is needed. So if you are from marginalized background, mostly by yourself, trying to get your first project out there is extremely difficult. And a few days ago, there's a new report from the Arts Council in terms of Black creatives, and they were saying exactly the same, that they are facing more systemic barriers in accessing funding, although the fundings are there. So it's on them to see, what are we doing? It's just, the name now, it's saying that this is for diverse creatives, or are we changing the way that these fundings are created? And there's something that it was shared during the events, that it says that Black creatives or people from diverse backgrounds on the creative landscape are over mentored and underfunded. So we need to leverage their funds. People and organizations and creatives, they need fundings to create those projects that at the end is going to impact their own communities. So those little by little are going to create those systemic changes. But all of that needs to be shifted from the upper level, the governments, and the ones created the funding and the ones allocated funds, in order to be accessible for everybody.
Thanks. And Berta, I'm going to come over to you, because obviously INAR have like a really good, like, holistic analysis of racism in Ireland. So I just wonder, in terms of kind of the role of the state, and obviously historically it hasn't kind of covered itself in glory in its own kind of behavior and treatment of marginalized communities, of women. I wonder what your take is.
Yeah, no, so I suppose, like, from INAR, like, we have been very actively involved in the development of the NAPR, the National Action Plan Against Racism. So we've advised the government several times on this, and we have a shadow action plan against racism as well, which has involved, like, many people from marginalized communities that have been in the reviewing process and supporting the investigation and commenting on the proposals and everything. But I suppose, like, until the government, like, and the state, like, takes it all on board and creates an environment that really, like, shapes our society in a way that, like, as they are saying, and the others were mentioning as well, like, that creates a truly inclusive environment for everybody to have, like, real equity and like, real opportunities, because at the end of the day, like, we're really not seeing them. Like, I mean, that's been all said already. But yeah, I think, like, we really need, like, a lot more commitment from the government to take on the responsibility of creating that environment that allows everybody to thrive. And especially now, as Ireland is becoming more and more diverse, like our society is going to remain like dysfunctional until we allow everybody to really thrive in a similar fashion. So yeah, I was taking notes. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I do think that's an incredibly important point. Because as Neve was saying, like in terms of people's like lived experience, their material conditions, of course people are angry. Of course people are looking for kind of a solution or a quick fix. And yeah, like I like that point where you're saying that the state actually does have a role in improving people's material conditions, and they do that through public services. As Neve was saying, everyone should have a right to housing. Everyone should have a right to healthcare, to community supports for school places for their children. Like it shouldn't be that we are competing with one another, people of our own class, of our own gender, what have you. So I think that that's an incredibly important point to make. I'm just conscious of time, and this was obviously a lunchtime webinar, and I know we could talk about this all day because it's so fascinating. You're all just, you've got so much expertise and experience, but I'm going to go around and do a quick, just kind of 1 minute for each of you, just to make kind of final comments. Bea, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, I think that it is important for days like today to mention that everything that we've been talking today, it's not happening just in a vacuum. This is happening in lots of places in the world. Let's not forget Palestinian women. Let's not forget Afghan women, women in the Congo, and everybody facing this systemic discriminations, genocides, and occupation that is really, appalling all of us these days. So I think that my final message for people around us is to start feeling okay with making those mistakes, that we need to do a lot of work to deconstruct, ourselves, to unlearn what we have learned and learn the new things, because everything that we are doing has been learned. So we can unlearn that and learn a new ways of doing things, to echoing CPW and Neve's messages of we can do all of this together. There's more things that are unifying us than dividing us. And I think that with conversations like today, we can move forward and raise more awareness, and maybe motivate people to jump into the boards and jump into the mission together. I think that is not to discourage anybody, but there's still lots to do. But I think that all of this needs to be recognized, needs to be acknowledged, and this needs to be named, that all of this is happening, in order for us to start pointing, points of work and call action, and start stopping that surface, intentions on paper that might sound, as we say, sunshines and rainbows, and actually thinking about what can we do outcome oriented to tackle these systemic barriers, and what can we do that is measurable and is tangible in order to remove those that were created. Therefore, it can be uncreated and create new ones collectively that will work for all of us.
Thank you so much. Sapere, I'll come to you next.
Okay, thank you so much for this opportunity. So I would like to say, I think the last words will be self-care, because this is an extremely difficult space to work within. So it's important that as we continue to tackle, to have these conversations, take care of yourself. It's very important, because you might lose yourself in the process trying to save others. You need yourself in order for you to be able to do that. You have to be a cup that is full. You can't be an empty cup feeling. So for me, that is a very important message that I'm saying to myself and to others, and to say, let's continue with the struggle, because as we continue doing this, you are trying to dismantle the system. Another barrier is being created, and you still need to dismantle. So also working together, collaborations, not competing with each other, but within the spaces. Let's work together. Let's find ways to go forward, because the struggle is for us all, but together in a collective way, we can win this. Thank you.
Thanks. I think that's really good advice. Neve, I'm going to come to you next.
This is one thing that wasn't mentioned that comes up time and time for me that I really wanted to put forward here, is that Across the 70 communities and the communities that I work with, women are to the fore in fighting fascism in Ireland. It's coming across that it's the men that are doing it and all this, but it's the women. Every community I come into, it's women that are standing up to the fore. And that's never acknowledged. It's something that I want to shout. All women, of all of us, the older, younger, women of colour, traveller, disabled, everybody's coming to the fore to fight this. And I think what we want to see, one thing I just want to take it is that the far right are trying to speak on our behalf. They're talking about being our protectors. They're talking about protecting women, protecting our children. As far as I know, we protect ourselves and we're pretty bloody good at it, especially when we work together. Do you know what I mean? So I think for women's organizations and women's groups, they really need, if I can just leave it, need to equip themselves around that, be brave and be bold to stand up to that, to say that we're doing this, we're fighting back, we understand the system, and, you know, and not let kind of the far right or even kind of more conservative take hold of that narrative on us, and for the narrative that we have fought for a long, long time to get. But within that, we need more representation. And I can't, whether it's in government life, whether it's in local council life, and women of all types. Now, I understand we have the quotas and it's a very blunt instrument and all, but it's not enough. It's not enough to have the diverse voices that we need, as Ray was talking about. Because if we don't have that, women, so many women feel marginalized, so many feel left behind. And I think there's such commonalities among us that we don't realize that we can actually kind of come together. So it's that critical women's voices and those critical experiences that need to be lifted up. And again, I'm just going to say the last time, there's more of a, we need to kind of stick together, not look at what's dividing us or the differences, but look at how we can come together to create the solutions that we need. I think is the most important part. And thanks again for a really interesting lunchtime.
Yeah, definitely very, very interesting. Berta, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, so yeah, thank you so much for having me as well. Take part in this. It was brilliant. But yeah, like I suppose like I was just reflecting back on how we started talking about the importance of having conversations and engaging with our communities, and we ended talking, like we finished off talking about the role of the state, and I suppose like without, I think if like we really need the role of the state to without the state taking action, and the structures and institutions that we have around us changing, the conversations really won't take place in an ideal environment. Like we're not like yeah, we're not going to thrive without the support of just the underlying structures that are ingrained in our society, shaping everything, like our conversations, like the way we engage with people, how people might be calling their friends an IPA. Oh, but you know, that's what they are. But seeing them beyond their humanity. So I think it's really important, and as women especially, to acknowledge our positionality. Like I often struggle to with my own identity. I mean, like, oh, like, you know, how will I find my place in the anti-racism sector as a white woman? And but there has to be like our space is there, and it must be taken up in all its forms. Like we need to be heard as well. Like we need to be the biggest supporters of the marginalized voices. And as Niamh was saying, the word solidarity is so important today. And just like a final thing, I suppose that I would have liked to say earlier about the microaggressions. Yeah, the importance of learning people's names, and I think like challenging, like last weekend I kind of nicely took back to somebody who just told someone that they were going to call them John because their name was too long, and just I was like, oh, but what's the meaning of your name? And kind of brought the man back into the conversation. And I think there's like really simple ways in which we can like have a conversation with people about like small things that that people might not see as like what they really are in the broad scheme of things. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Berta. Yeah, listen, I suppose my takeaway is going to be that women are at the, and I already knew it anyway, women are at the forefront of fighting fascism in Ireland, fighting discrimination, fighting racism. So yeah, let's just keep creating the spaces. Let's keep building the empathy, listening to each other's stories, building that solidarity, and let's continue to try and smash the systems that oppress all of us together. So I just want to thank everybody, for spending their lunchtime with us. This was brilliant. Our panelists are all really incredible women. And yeah, solidarity and happy Anti-Racism Month. I look forward to working with you in future.
Thanks a lot to Rachel and Liliana and Colette that are in the behind the cameras, and of course the interpreters making this event more accessible. So thanks a lot, guys.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. All right.